Welcome to another edition of Speak Up.
Επιμέλεια Γιώργος Πιτροπογιαννάκης.
In this issue, we celebrate the centenary of the New York subway. We visit a book town in the Welsh Valleys, and we talk to film star Denzel Washington. After that, we meet a decidedly original group of musicians from Liverpool. We talk to Italy's rugby coach, and we find out all about Satanism in Norfolk. We then head to Manchester and on to Suffolk, before concluding with a letter and a short story from the United States. That is also where we begin, in the city of New York.
This year, the New York subway system celebrates two important anniversaries. The first is its centenary, for it opened for business in 1904. The second is the 25th anniversary of the Guardian Angels, a citizens group that was founded in 1979 in order to combat the system's appalling levels of violence. Certainly, riding the subway is a lot safer now than it was back then, as the Angels' charismatic founder, Curtis Sliwa, who incidentally celebrates his own 50th birthday this year, explains.
Back in 1979, I was a night manager of a McDonald's in the South Bronx, and you couldn't get into a worse neighborhood than the South Bronx in New York City in 1979. There were burning buildings, there were street gangs everywhere, and there were particular subway lines, which were like the veins and arteries of the city for the working class people. It was the only way to travel, because an average working class person could not afford a cab, could not afford a limousine, could not afford a rental car. So what you would do is you would take the subways, and there was a number 4 train, which had been nicknamed the Muggers Express, the number 2 train, the Beast, the D train for danger. And all of these subway lines passed the McDonald's restaurant that I was managing at night. And it was bad enough in the restaurant with all the crime that was taking place, and this was just from my employees, but from the customers and those that were trying to rob the customers. And then late at night at about 10 or 11, oftentimes the front lobby of the McDonald's restaurant looked like a casualty ward of an inner city hospital. People would come in having been stabbed, having ridden on the subway line, the number 4 train, the Muggers Express, struggled down the stairs, walked into the lobby, bleeding everywhere. People had been hit in the head with pipes, mugged, sexually assaulted. And so it just became so apparent that crime, which was already bad, was getting increasingly out of control. And at that point in 1979, New York City was on the brink of fiscal insolvency. It was ready to declare Chapter 11, which is bankruptcy here in the United States. They were cutting back on the hiring of police. They were laying off police. They were firing police. And so, in essence, late at night on the subway system from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning, the off-peak hours, the mayor had announced that there would not be any uniformed police officers patrolling. This was an invitation to criminals to just come on and stalk many of the riders, rob them, maraud them, and there was a sense of lawlessness at night. So, because I had been very successful in developing other volunteer programs, street cleanups, beautification of neighborhoods, planting of trees, boarding up of abandoned buildings, all of that very supported by the community and supported by the elected officials, I figured I would take the next step and organize these same young people into patrolling the subways, which again was critical to the way people would come and go to work or play or to their house of worship and begin to do so at night.
But as the Guardian Angels were horrified to discover, initial reactions to their presence on the subway were far from positive.
We met a flood of criticism by the cops, who had been fired because they felt we were threatening their job security. The unions that represented them, they didn't want to see volunteers there. The mayor and the elected officials who felt this was like a slap in the face, an indictment against their ability to do the job. The elderly and middle-aged people that we were there to help, they were terrified of us because they just assumed, oh, these are black and Hispanic and white teenagers and Asian teenagers. They must be thugs. They must be a gang. So they were terrified of us. And the gangs, the legitimate gangs, they wanted to kill us. So everywhere you looked, we had enemies, we had adversaries, and the very people we were trying to voluntarily help, they would literally at times run away from us. We would enter a subway train, and let's say there were a woman with 2 children there. She would clasp her pocketbook, she would grab her children's hands, and they would run off to the next car of the train, terrified of us, assuming that we were like the savage nomads, the black spades, any number of different youth gangs that used to ride the subways on a regular basis and mug, rape, pillage, and rob.
Nevertheless, the Guardian Angels gradually won over public opinion. This was because, by concentrating on 12 stations in the South Bronx, they managed to produce a drop in crime statistics within 6 months, whereas in all other areas of the city, violence increased. Yet Mayor Koch and his colleagues continued to oppose the Angels' efforts, and police officers actively harassed them. Sliwa admits that he was arrested no fewer than 72 times. Street gangs and other criminals also attacked them, and 6 guardian angels have been shot and killed over the years. Yet New York City has successfully fought crime, and for this, Sliwa gives credit to Rudolph Giuliani, who was mayor from 1994 to 2002. There are far fewer angels on patrol on the subway today, and Sliwa thinks that the real problem areas nowadays are the city's housing projects and schools. There is a certain irony in this, as he believes that a lack of education is one of the key causes of violence.
I see this increasingly as a dilemma, because when I go to youthful detention facilities for young adults or to prisons for adults, I notice there is one common linkage between young men and older men who are in jail, and now increasingly younger ladies and older ladies. They can't read. They're not educated. They can't write. 50% or more are incapable of communicating, are incapable of understanding concepts and ideas because they have no ability to read or write. So now, they're languishing around in jail like 22 hours a day doing nothing. And they can't even read. They can't even write a letter. I mean, think of the frustration and the anger that they must have, particularly in America, which is a society that demands that you have written verbal communication skills, and most importantly, you have the ability to read. Because whether you're reading a book or a computer, you can't read. You're really in trouble in this country.
Across the Atlantic now to Wales.
A visitor to the Welsh village of Blenavon would never guess that it played a leading role in creating modern Britain. Today, the industrial activity that brought prosperity to this remote region has entirely disappeared. However, the community is now attempting to revive its fortunes with an unusual approach. The architect of its plan for regeneration is a bookseller called James Hanna. He has come a long way to revive Blenavon's fortunes and now faces a series of formidable challenges. One of the least of these is to adapt to a way of life radically different from that of his native New Orleans.
Well, the weather, of course, is much better here, and the food is superb. It is a jolt. It is a culture shock. I grew up in the American South, and frankly, I think being here is comparable to the 50s or maybe 60s in the rural South. So it's different. It's enjoyable. The people are honest and open, and there's not in New Orleans, we were for a number, I think 2 or 3 different times, we were the murder capital of the States. And, there may be a Saturday night fight here, but that's about it.
James Hanna was, of course, being sarcastic about the weather and the food. Relentless rain is the typical forecast for the valleys of South Wales, and their working-class communities are not known for sophisticated cuisine. In fact, the poor reputation of the area's cultural life was one reason why considerable scepticism met James Hanna's plan for reviving Blenavon, to open 14 shops selling second-hand books. But even if local residents are not great readers, the local council welcomed James Hanna with open arms. John Roger, a council project director, explained why.
This community grew over 100 years. It was a kind of Klondike based on the iron and coal industry, and these industries declined dramatically. So the population of this community fell from about 12,500 in 1921 to about 6,000 in 1995. A town which was economically in decline, socially in decline, and physically in decline. When you add to that the changes in distribution, the pressures from out-of-town supermarkets and this sort of thing, we ended up with half of the shops in town boarded up. We were looking for some sort of reuse for these shops, which would be of interest to tourists, and Booktown fits that like a glove.
The challenge facing James Hanna might seem immense, but he has a blueprint to follow. Hay-on-Wye, the famous book town on the Anglo-Welsh border, has already established itself as a mecca for bibliophiles under the leadership of its unofficial king, Richard Booth, a close friend of and major inspiration for James Hanna. Since the 70s, Hay-on-Wye has attracted literary tourists from around the world, and its flourishing bookstores have stimulated the growth of hotels, restaurants, cafes, and a literary festival. Booth's formula is now being applied in over 20 communities around the world. A major boost to Glenarvan's chances of enjoying similar success to Hay on Wye is its unique industrial heritage. The local ironworks, once the most advanced in the world, and the nearby Big Pit Mining Museum are the core of an officially designated World Heritage Site, and they already attract a steady flow of tourists. James Hanna is optimistic that he can induce many of these visitors to buy books. In fact, the village's recently opened bookshops are already attracting a strikingly cosmopolitan range of customers, and some of them even come from the surrounding area.
We had people here from Cyprus, India, South Africa, Italy, Greece, literally around the world. We have 50% what I would call local, meaning within 30 or 40 miles of here, and 50% coming from literally every place. It was really interesting when we opened because I had heard from some of the locals, why are you opening a book town in Glenavon? Nobody here reads. Well, in fact, that couldn't be more untrue. When we did open, we found that valleys were flocking to us like they'd been hungry and we were feeding them. It was absolutely amazing. They came in thanking us for coming here.
Back in the United States, Denzel Washington is currently in the news.
This month sees the Italian release of the film Out of Time, starring Denzel Washington. Washington plays Matt Lee Whitlock, a police chief in a sleepy Florida town who finds his world falling apart when he becomes the prime suspect in the homicide case that he is investigating. Speak Up attended a press conference in which Washington discussed his role. In addition to being one of the film industry's most acclaimed actors, he is married with 4 children, which is quite an achievement for a Hollywood star. Out of Time is also a film about temptation, and Washington was asked whether this was ever a feature of his own life.
Nobody's immune. No, nobody's immune to temptation. Come on, I'm a human being like anyone else. I don't read the tabloids, whatever they say. Well, they hail you and then they nail you, don't they? So sooner or later, they'll be coming my way. I am an actor, and I'm a human being. And like I said, they hail you and they nail you. People say, well, you're this, hey, don't put that on me. You don't know me. You know the parts I played. I played Stephen Biko. I'm not Stephen Biko. I played Malcolm X. I'm not Malcolm X. I love my family. My family's first. And that's it.
Denzel Washington then discussed his musical tastes.
I had a unique upbringing in that I was kind of like in a town and then kind of getting into the streets, and then suddenly my mom snatched me out and I went to this all-white private school with about 3 black kids, and they introduced me to strange people like Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull and all of that. So I had a whole rock thing going on for years. So there's a lot of different eras. It depends, you know. I went through my whole hip-hop era. I guess I was clinging to my youth or something.
So what sort of records does he buy now?
It depends, you know. I can't say just this kind of music. I like Heather Headley. Just all kinds of stuff. I went and bought some of the stuff that I was talking about. I bought the Best of Cream. I bought some Led Zeppelin. So it's just whatever my mood is. I don't even go into the store necessarily looking for anything.
So is he a downloader?
Ah, I'm too, that shows my age, right? Although I was hanging out with a buddy of mine, name drop, is Lenny Kravitz, and he had like 5,700 songs on the iPod. I'm like, can I get one of those? They said, yeah, they hooked me up. So I got like 5,700. I mean, like everything the Beatles did and everything, you know, it's crazy, so it's cool.
He was then asked whether he had wanted to be an actor as a child.
Football. Wasn't interested in acting, didn't know anything about it, didn't know anybody who was. Didn't have a lot of examples or reasons to want to be like anybody because there wasn't anybody out there that looked like me. So the guys that looked like me were Jim Brown and Bob Hayes. I grew up a jock. I was 20 years old before I took an acting class because I figured if somebody told me you can get an A, it's easy. They were wrong.
In conclusion, Denzel Washington, who turns 50 at the end of this year, was asked about the experience of working with younger actors. Out of Time co-stars Eva Mendes, Sanaa Lathan, and Dean Cain, while Washington directed Derek Luke in Antoine Fisher.
I just like to see people do well. And even going back to my athletic days, you know, I worked in the boys' club, I worked as a counselor, I coached kids. When my kids were coming up, my oldest boy, I coached their teams, and my other kids too. I like to see young people do well. Nothing makes me happier than to see Derek Luke walking around here now a year later, suits that are more expensive than mine, and seeing Sanaa and Dean Cain and Eva do well. That makes me happy.
Returning to the UK, we visit Liverpool.
Liverpool has been the birthplace of more bands than any other British city. Some went on to fame, others disappeared, but few of them have found themselves in the situation that Urban Strawberry Lunch did shortly after they began playing in 1987. Ambrose Reynolds was one of the founder members and saw his musical future literally go up in smoke.
We were rehearsing in a squat. Somebody broke into the squat and set fire to it. We were sitting there watching TV and it's like, oh look, it's Bowl Street. Oh, that's near where we rehearse. Oh, that is where we rehearse. Oh, damn.
All their instruments, guitars, drums, synthesizers, went up in flames, and all that was left was a few old car wheels and some lengths of metal pipe. A disaster at any time, it was made worse by the fact that the band had begun to achieve some national success.
We didn't have any insurance, and we had a tour booked. We had 2 TV gigs booked for the following week, and we were wondering, is this the bit where we quit, or is this the bit where we go, well, let's just do it anyway? And being old punk rockers from back in the day, we decided to just go ahead and do it anyway.
The band's new instruments didn't come from a music store, but the rubbish skips around the streets of Liverpool. Metal sinks, lengths of scaffolding pipe, plastic tubing, wheel rims from a Mini, a Volkswagen and a Mercedes. Anything that could make a sound was taken from rubbish bins and converted into musical instruments. It could be thought of as ecology becoming art, but those thoughts didn't enter the band's head.
We didn't think about it in that way. It was. I think this is what's good about Urban Strawberry Lunch, is that we just wanted to make music, and we didn't care what we made it on. We didn't care that it was a good story or that it was an ecological thing to do or whatever. It was just, we wanted to make music. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any instruments. So we just used whatever we could find for free that sounded good. We had a pretty unique angle, just using entirely scrap metal and plastic tubes, playing a lot of world music styles but combining them with rock styles and punk and all different things, all thrown into one bag. People saw us on the TV, and schools and colleges and places went absolutely crazy, they're phoning up the TV company. Where can I book these people? And we were pretty much fully booked for the next 18 months.
Liz Carlisle has been with the band almost from the start and has become a master at playing the bat phone. Long plastic tubes hit with table tennis bats, and the hollow leg from a shop mannequin that has 2 strings and is played with a violin bow, as well as dozens of other weird instruments. According to her, many people are surprised by the type of music that Urban Strawberry Lunch plays.
You know, when we say, what do you play? We play junk music. Everybody expects it to be very avant-garde, kind of plinky-plonky, non-tuned, atonal music, and it's not. What we play effectively is rock and roll, or, you know, the contemporary version thereof.
The music is powerful and emotional, even if it might seem a bit strange, but it's no stranger than the band's name.
There is actually really no good story behind the name Urban Strawberry Lunch, which is a real shame. So we like to say urban because we're from the city, and strawberries because we're very tasty, and lunch because there's no such thing as a free one.
We still got the wheels that were in that fire are the wheels that we use today. And we've still got some of the pipes, and that's all black and charred, but it still all works, which is incredible, really. It's a real phoenix story, I think.
Next up, we meet the remarkable John Kirwan. As a rugby player, John Kirwan's fame is secure. Representing New Zealand's formidable All Blacks in 63 matches, he won a reputation as one of the country's all-time greatest wingers. He also scored a try in the first ever Rugby World Cup final, when New Zealand beat France in Auckland in 1987. But as a coach, his reputation and his contract hangs in the balance. Since he took over in 2002, the Italian team has won only 2 games in the prestigious Six Nations tournament. In February, public interest in the game shot up after an uplifting victory over Scotland. Yet this success was followed by a reasonably close defeat in Ireland and, unfortunately, a crushing one in Wales. Yet Kirwan's job was never going to be easy. Italy is a nation so obsessed with football that it has little time for another sport. Some observers argue that the game is too violent and aggressive for a gentle and civilised people like the Italians, but Kerwin does not agree.
Well, I think that you've got it completely wrong because rugby is actually controlling aggression, and it's the ability to control aggression because aggression is part of life, just like love is. You don't have an option. You have aggression, you have love, you have sadness, you have all the emotions. I think rugby is an outstanding sport for young men to do because they can channel their aggression. The only difference between people fighting and not fighting is control, because everyone has that in them. So rugby is a very important sport to control that aggression, and I think young kids 7, 8, 9 and 10 need to channel that energy within the strict laws of rugby. So I don't see rugby as a negative, I see it as a positive for teaching young children, especially young males, how to control their aggression.
But John Kerwin's intentions are not to impose a new culture on Italy. In fact, the reverse is true. He describes himself as an enthusiastic convert to the Italian way of life, with a passport and his home in Bergamo shared with his Italian wife and their 3 children to prove it. The only aspects of his hometown of Auckland that he admits to missing are his family and surfing. Italian attitudes influence his approach, not only to life, but also to rugby.
I think we associate everything with rugby, but I think what I appreciated was a different type of life. So my father never kissed me, we only ever shook hands. I kiss my kids. I don't feel embarrassed to show my emotions, no matter what they are, joy, sadness. I don't have that restriction on my emotions, and so that's what Italy has taught me, and that's what we have to channel as far as rugby is concerned. We have to channel all those emotions into the 80 minutes of football because the Italians are very good at showing their emotions. It's not that my father didn't love me any less than I love my kids or anything like that, because that's not the case, but it's just a restraint of emotions that I don't think is healthy.
So far, this emotion has yielded limited success. Against the skills and tradition of a team like New Zealand's All Blacks, Italy is consistently outgunned. Yet John Kerwin is passionately convinced that Italy, which has several times New Zealand's population, has the potential to be a great rugby nation. He is sure that Italians can become passionate about rugby once they realise that it suits a far wider range of physical types than their beloved soccer. But despite his optimistic words, John Kerwin is not a man of frequent smiles. In conclusion, we asked him whether there was anything about Italy that made his job difficult.
Disorganisation, complete and total disorganisation. When you have a creative culture like this, one of the beliefs is that to be creative you need to be disorganised or have a free mind. And so I've found the disorganisation of Italy not good for the way I work.
Our next feature is not for listeners of a nervous disposition.
When sewage inspector Bob Davy moved from the south of England to a tiny Norfolk village, he was thinking of a quiet retirement. One day, however, his wife Gloria went on a ramble through the nearby countryside and found an ancient church in a very isolated spot up a hill. The church was in ruins. Its squat rectangular tower of the type found all over East Anglia was covered in thick ivy from top to bottom, and the roof had caved in. This was St. Mary's, Houghton on the Hill, but as Bob Davy explains, his wife told him there were other problems here, so he went to take a look.
When I came up, I found what the problem was. It was laid out as a satanic temple, and for 30 years a satanic cult had used it. And in the middle of the nave there was a pagan altar and a sacrificial fire, upside down crosses, and all the bits and pieces that go with satanic worship. Now, during their time here, they opened the grave of a rector, the Reverend Robert Say, who died in 1764. So they broke into the tomb. They opened the coffin with a pointed stake, which they left inside, and took the skull and long bones, which they used for their ceremonies.
Bob Davy was shocked and decided to restore the church, which had never been deconsecrated, and return it to its former use. The walls had to be rebuilt, a new door put in, and the nave re-roofed. It was a labour of love. Bob Davy cleared the yard of blackthorn and planted thousands of bulbs instead, killed off the ivy on the tower, and incredibly built a road up to the church with his own hands. However, he discovered the Satanists had no plans to give up their meeting place, and that he would have to tackle them by himself.
Now, providing they keep within the law, no one's allowed to interfere with them now, because the laws against witchcraft were abandoned in the 1950s. But when you start breaking open graves and using churches for your ceremonies, that is against the law, so they can be stopped. Not that the law around here was very interested, and it was a question of guarding the place and turning them back when they're holding their ceremonies, their sabbats.
So for 2 years, every 6 weeks, Bob Davy would come up to the hill to guard the entrance to St. Mary's. The Satanists, with their black cloaks and black candles in their bags, must have been surprised to see an elderly man with a white Old Testament prophet's beard blocking their way. There was some pushing and shoving, and he says even an attempt to run him over. Later on, the 70-year-old was joined by 6 burly soldiers from the local territorial army, but he continued to receive threats, by mail, by phone, and in person too.
One came to the door and threatened me with death if I carried on up here. We will curse you, you will wither and die. I haven't done much withering. I've never been fitter, actually, than when I've been working up here. So it must be a very slow curse.
On their last visit, Bob Davy's adversaries arrived in the afternoon, taking him by surprise, and smeared the church walls with human blood. They never came back. You might think dealing with very determined devil worshippers would have been enough excitement for one person. But as restoration work on the ancient church started in earnest, there was another surprise in store, a pleasant one this time. When the old plaster was taken off, the interior walls of the church turned out to be covered in well-preserved Romanesque paintings from around the 10th and 11th centuries. Their early date and unusual iconography, such as a representation of the Trinity, put Houghton on the Hill on the map of European art history.
And now to Manchester.
The first television screens were tiny, and you needed a magnifying lens put in front of them to watch the action. Now we have home cinema and plasma-filled flat screens. In Exchange Square in the centre of Manchester, they've gone one further, with the biggest television screen in the world, where up to 8,000 people have watched the same programme. Sarah Griffiths is the big screen manager.
The big screen is actually all about a pilot, an experiment if you like, in public space broadcasting. So we've got a giant screen which measures 25 square metres, and it's fixed on the side of one of the main shopping squares, and we're broadcasting 24 hours a day television, and that includes sound, which is unusual for a lot of the screens. We've got sound from 7 in the morning till midnight, and we wanted to see if people enjoy watching it and whether they'd come to the square specifically to watch, whether they'd take part in any events that we put on in the square related to the screen.
Switch a television on in front of a group of people and everyone will want something different. So choosing what to show and what not to show on the big screen has been one of the major concerns for Sarah Griffiths and her team.
What we stick on the screen is also part of the experiment. We're trying different things to see what people like, and what we found so far is that obviously regular news programmes, they always go down well. Lifestyle programmes go down very well, particularly during the day. Sport, of course, is a very big draw, especially at the weekend. We always have all the sporting activities on, and during the day when you have snooker or tennis or racing or darts, you know, even in the grimmest weather you'll get people sat there watching.
Part of the original idea for the big screen was The Bigger Picture, a project that would allow local video artists and community groups to show their work on the giant screen. Kate Taylor is in charge of programming for The Bigger Picture.
The thing about the screen in public space is it really has the capacity for collective moments where a lot of people suddenly will look up and see something they recognise and it will hold them. I think the arts programming is all geared towards that, is geared towards trying to get those moments where people will look up, because it is in a public space and it's in a space that a lot of people just walk through. So to give people something they can look up and either recognise or will relate to them or startle them or give them something to think about is what we're aiming to do.
Initial complaints that the enormous screen would spoil the environment both physically and by being too noisy seem to have died down, and the pilot experiment seems to have worked well.
I think it's a really good community facility. That sounds a bit jargony, but it's not just entertainment. It's just showing that television is more than just sort of piping programmes into somebody's living room.
Suffolk also has an unusual attraction.
What does Eastern England have in common with Denmark, Germany, Poland, Lithuania and Russia? The answer is amber, 40-million-year-old fossilized tree resin lying under the Baltic Sea. When heavy storms tear the amber from the seabed, it's thrown up onto the shores of the surrounding countries. Sometimes the wind and tide carry it across the North Sea to the Suffolk coast. Here it lies among thousands of other pebbles, noticeable only because it's light and feels warm to the touch. The real beauty of amber lies beneath its ordinary exterior, says Robin Fornell, an international jeweller and leading amber expert.
First of all, we polish the rough surface with a piece of fine wet and dry sandpaper. Then we will get a yellow duster and, using good old-fashioned brasso or teacup, the car polish, and just sit there gently polishing away the stone in the yellow duster, and slowly, ever so slowly, it starts to glow, and it's a most satisfying feeling, transforming it from this rather inconspicuous beach pebble to this wonderful polished gem.
Most valuable gemstones, such as sapphires, rubies and diamonds, are formed as hard crystals within the earth. Amber, however, is an organic substance, originally formed from trees above the ground and then fossilized over millions of years. It's aromatic, generates static electricity, and is believed to be good for the health. For thousands of years, it has been taken in powdered form or worn next to the skin to improve blood circulation and as a cure for stomach complaints, gout, liver problems, rheumatism, arthritis, and asthma. Amber is very soft, about the same hardness as a fingernail, which makes it ideal for carving as jewellery. It's been traded for centuries and worn in rings, necklaces, and bracelets. Carved amber, dating back 10,000 years, has been found in caves in western England. In 1986, Robin Fornell bought a specialist amber shop in Southwold on the Suffolk coast and became Britain's largest amber dealer. 5 years ago, he started the country's only amber museum here, which had 100,000 visitors in its opening year. Robin Fornell's first and favourite piece is an antique carved Buddha, now darkened with age, dating from the mid-1800s. Pointing to one giant piece on display, he explains that amber is only slightly heavier than water. This means that in seawater, it floats just beneath the surface, an ideal catch for someone.
18 months or so ago, we had 2 fishermen turn up. They'd been out trawling. They were about 3 miles offshore, just a bit north of Southwold here. And they were trawling, and they brought up this piece of amber, and it weighs 2.2 kilo. It's the biggest piece ever found in this country. So I paid them a considerable sum of money for it, which they were delighted with, because of course the EU haven't any quotas on amber for fishermen, and the Inland Revenue don't know what amber is. They were very happy fishermen.
Many of the Amber Museum's visitors are drawn to the collection of inclusions, objects, usually insects and spiders, trapped and preserved in amber. These species are extremely useful for documenting the fossil record of animals and for studying biogeography and the distribution of plants and animals. No other gemstone tells us so much about evolution and the history of our planet, says Robin Fornell, who is often known as King Amber. The museum collection even includes a silver and amber crown. Unfortunately, it does not fit his head. Like many jewellers, he once considered amber inferior to crystal gems, but now has only admiration and enthusiasm for his very special beach pebbles.
But I think it's a very naive attitude, because amber is just so beautiful. No 2 pieces of amber are ever the same, and it has such a history, and it has such a connection with prehistory. The insects that are identified in it, anything between 30 and 50 million years old, long before man walked the earth. And some of these insects are still around today. They're still around on trees. So amber has a tremendous impact on science as well as jewellery.
And now, a letter from America.
Foreigners visiting New York are always surprised by the platoons of people lurking in the doorways and outside office buildings, furtively puffing cigarettes even in appalling weather. Now comes Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who has just signed the toughest anti-smoking law in the world. Not content with the punitive taxes that have driven a pack of Marlboros to more than $7.50, the mayor and the city council have just outlawed smoking in all workplaces and public spaces, including restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. For this reason, even affluent investment bankers in bow ties may soon be found smoking their expensive cigars in drafty doorways, as they will no longer be allowed to enjoy them in the sanctuary of their private clubs. An Englishman's club may be his castle, but the New Yorker's is now a smoke-free zone. Europeans especially make fun of the ban. But really, Bloomberg's got a point. It's nice not to be choking on second-hand smoke, as I do too often when traveling. What about New Yorkers' long-held right to do themselves harm? Not when it endangers others, says a man who gave up smoking 2 decades back, but reportedly celebrated a daughter's birthday 5 years ago at the City Wine and Cigar Company. The link between tobacco and cancer is well established, and those willful enough or dumb enough to risk their own lives have no right to impose their vice on others. The ban comes at a time when disapproval of smoking is virtually unanimous, even among smokers. Most who still puff do so in a combination of guilt and self-destructive defiance, as if to say, I know what I'm doing is bad and stupid, but I can't help myself. The educational system has confirmed negative attitudes in the younger generation, much to the discomfiture of some adults. I remember having to hide my cigarettes from my parents, one friend ruefully remarks. Now I have to hide them from my kids. One day, her 10-year-old son flung her cigarettes out the window. I don't want you to die, he wailed. My friend was nonplussed. Find me a mother with a good answer to that, she says. It's been difficult in recent years to venture into the stairwells of many office buildings because of the smell from cigarettes smoked furtively by addicts who didn't have the time to go outdoors. For 8 years now, New Yorkers have been able legally to light up only in bars, in designated smoking areas at airports and railway stations, and in restaurants with fewer than 35 seats. Those exceptions have ended with the new law. Open spaces, outdoor cafes, rooftop restaurants, terraces are still exempt, however. There's also always the privacy of your own home, yet even that is no longer a certainty. A New York City building recently threatened to evict an apartment owner because his smoking was seeping under his neighbor's door and through their vents. What next? Already, illegal underground smoking bars are popping up surreptitiously in trendier downtown neighborhoods, not unlike the famous speakeasies during Prohibition. But personally, I expect the great anti-tobacco crusade will even extend to a ban on smoking in the great outdoors before long. Why should people trying to enjoy the fresh air in Central Park have to have other people smoke in their noses as they take a walk? After all, this is New York. We never know when to stop.
Still in Britain, we examine the mixed race phenomenon. Stars like Halle Berry, Tiger Woods, Keanu Reeves and Mariah Carey represent a massive demographic change. Each of these celebrities is mixed race. That is, born to parents from different racial groups, and it makes them role models for a section of society in exponential growth. It is estimated that by 2030, 10% of Americans will have ancestors from at least 2 racial groups. Charlie Owen of University College London is the first academic to analyse the growth of the UK's mixed population. He describes how in Britain the trend has already taken effect.
What I've looked at is particularly children of mixed parentage or mixed race, children with different racial backgrounds, and that's very much a growing phenomenon in the UK demography. For generations there have been people of mixed backgrounds, particularly in the port areas like Liverpool, London, Newcastle, Cardiff particularly. But it's growing at a very rapid rate, so that now there are many more children of mixed race, mixed backgrounds than there used to be in the past. Amongst the total population, just over 1% identify themselves as mixed in the 2001 census. But amongst children under 5, it's about 4%. So there's a much greater representation of mixed race amongst young children than there is in the total population. So as that group gets older and moves through the population, that will become a feature of British demography.
This demographic change has already influenced the way we talk about race. The change is apparent from comparing how Bob Marley and Lenny Kravitz are perceived. Both had white fathers, but Bob Marley was regarded simply as black when he found success as a reggae musician in the 1970s, while the contemporary performer Lenny Kravitz is commonly described as mixed race. This change is not universally welcome. Many black activists argue the one-drop rule, that even the smallest drop of black blood makes an individual black. But what do the growing number of children with mixed parentage themselves think? Charlie Owen found out by interviewing members of the UK's largest category of mixed children, those with white and Afro-Caribbean ancestry.
It's always been thought that these are children with problems, that they're neither one thing nor the other, and this causes them psychological problems and that they feel misfits in society. But a few years ago we did some research here talking to adolescents or teenagers in secondary schools in Britain, some black children, some white, and some of mixed parentage. And what we found was that they were claiming a separate mixed identity. They were saying that we are not black, we're not white, we are mixed, and seeing this as a positive identity. Whereas a lot of people have said that there is no such thing as mixed. They're black. These are black children, and they should just identify with that group because they are in receipt of racism from society. And the usual phrase is that if a racist comes along, they're not going to half beat you up if you're only half black. So people who say that they're not black but they are mixed are somehow seen as trying to deny they're part of the black population and kind of get themselves out of being identified with black. But they were saying, no, it's not a negative way. It's not we're saying we're not black because we don't want to be in receipt of racism, but to say, no, positively, I have black parentage and white parentage. It's a positive mixed identity.
Many who are neither racist nor ethnic minority activists expect this blurring of racial barriers to change society for the better. Back in 1969, the band Blue Mink expressed a still popular view when they sang that what the world needed was a giant mixing pot out of which would come coffee-coloured people by the score. This, they believed, was the perfect recipe for a get-along scene. But is Generation M, as the mixed-race generation has been labelled, really the beginning of the end for racism? Will the mixed-raced minority eventually become a majority?
No, I don't think that is likely at all. I mean, there isn't a kind of inexorable march towards greater mixing. These things go forward and then they might reverse and go back and things would be different. You've only got to look at issues like ethnic cleansing in former Yugoslavia, where you've got integration which suddenly turns around. So I don't think we can assume that things will just move on slowly, becoming more and more integrated.
We conclude with a short story, Old Timer by Mike Krath. Please note that it has been divided into 3 tracks on the CD.
She was a recluse, and an ugly one at that. But in her heyday, she was a star, a glamour queen. No one missed her films. She couldn't walk the streets without being mauled by autograph-hungry fans. There she was, Lana Lone, Queen of the Silence. Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. Until the movies began to speak, and she faded quickly into obscurity. But not until she paid hefty money to create a well-known studio to take advantage of those who could talk and talk well. Lana Lone, Queen of the Silence, mogul of the studio, and now a recluse and forgotten, except for a monthly check from the studio she had founded. In all of this, she received perhaps 1 or 2 letters from fans every 10 years. She had received many when she retired, but they were reduced to a trickle when newer generations arose. It had been almost 5 years since she had received her last letter, but one day a letter arrived from a young university student who had, out of sheer despair, decided to pick her for a school film class term paper. He had watched one silent film that she had made, and then decided for extra credit to write her a letter in the hope that he would receive a reply so he could include it with his report. Lana opened the envelope slowly. No one ever wrote. Who was this? Timothy Dwight III? Dearest Lana Lone, I watched your movie. I was deeply moved. You were great. Sincerely, Timothy Dwight III. Lana had never written a reply to any of her fans during the height of her career. Her staff had done all that for her. She didn't have time and didn't care to correspond with them anyway. However, as time moved on and as the letters grew scarce, Lana began to change her mind, and every once in a while she would write back a little note saying thanks and sign her name. The past few letters she had taken the time to write several long replies, talking about the weather and describing in great detail how hot it was and the unexpected rain that had come down one afternoon, just before she was going to take her afternoon nap. She even included the weather report from her morning paper. But for Timothy Dwight III, she was going to do something different. This time, she was going to do something that would have been any young man's ambition during her golden years. She was going to sit down and write an invitation to dinner, and when he came over, she was going to kiss him. Timothy was having difficulty trying to fill in his paper when he received Lana's invitation. He couldn't believe it. Here was an old movie star, in the flesh, asking him to dine with her. Wow, he said. At first his roommates didn't seem to care that he was going to dinner at some old lady's house, but after Timothy explained to them in great detail who Lana Lone was and showed them her film and what others had written about her during that time, all his roommates could say was, "Wow, Lana Lone, and in the flesh!" The old mansion had seen its days of mirth. It stood stately on a hill, overlooking many other such posh past paradises, but the great iron gates were not used as frequently as they had been, so that the rust caused them to creak as they opened. Timothy Dwight III became a little nervous when he heard this and saw the grand home silently sitting, waiting for his arrival. He had only dreamed of ever being in the home of a movie star. He never expected an invitation, even from a has-been such as Lana Lawne. After he rang the doorbell, he waited for what seemed like forever as he heard a door, from inside, open and then shut, and soft footsteps walking ever so slowly. One step at a time, as though the action was difficult and laborious. However, as Timothy listened, the steps suddenly became quicker and swifter, and suddenly the door flew open, and there before Timothy Dwight III's eyes was a ravishing blonde wearing quite conservative clothes. "Hello," she said. "You must be Timmy. I am Lana Lawne." "Lana Lawne," Timothy said. "Surprised? You were expecting someone else? I hope not," this woman said. "Please come in." Timothy Dwight III's heart began to beat rapidly. This wasn't Lana Lawne. Lana Lawne was 97 years old. This bombshell was not much older than he was. Are you related to Lana Lawne?" Timothy asked. Upon this the woman laughed and chided him. "Related?" she said. "Don't make me laugh so. Just who do you think I am?" Timothy said. Do you do this with all your dates?" she asked. "Forget who they are the moment you take them out?" "No," Timothy said. "It's just that I was expecting it. Well, I was expecting it, and I don't mean that I am against plastic surgery or anything like that, but I was expecting to meet someone much older, and I do mean much, much older than me." "You are so sweet," she said. "You should still be in the movies," Timothy said. "Let's sit down and have some dinner," she said, "and you can flatter me some more. I should have invited my fans over for dinner years earlier." She took Timothy's arm and walked him to the dining room. It was during this time that they walked past a full-length mirror with ornates of the 20s decorating its stand. Lana's eyes caught a slight glimpse of another person in the room besides Timothy Dwight III, and she suddenly jumped. "Oh," she said. Oh. "What?" Timothy said. Lana looked around the room. There was no one there. "I saw someone, another woman," she said. Timothy looked around. He saw nothing. "I'm imagining things," Lana said. "Ghosts from the past, I suppose." She put her hand to her breast and breathed heavily and then laughed. "Oh, the joys of old age," she said, and then laughed again. "Shall we continue our walk to the dining room?" Timothy nodded, and then began to think this quite a queer woman, albeit a beautiful one. He tried to avert his staring from her, but he was unable. This was a true goddess, someone you would welcome as a work of art in your finest museum. Once they reached the dining room, Timothy's eyes temporarily feasted on an elegant setting. The finest china, silver, and crystal, orchids in decorative pots, champagne, caviar, the best meats, rich, tantalizing desserts, all the trappings of the rich and then some. Lana took his arm and led him to a chair next to hers at the far end of the table. "Please sit down," she said. "I had to put something together quickly before the cook left. This is her half-day, I'm afraid." Lana sat down and put a silk napkin in her lap. The light from the setting sun basked her face in a soft glow, as though she was not really there, but instead a holograph, a character from a movie, from her past. She leaned towards Timothy. "I let the maid go as well. I want this evening to be ours and ours alone," she said. "Nothing must disturb that." She touched his hand, and Timothy immediately grew weak. "I feel faint," Timothy said. "Faint?" Lana said. "Overwhelmed, perhaps. I am so happy. I didn't think I could still elicit such a response from my fans. Oh, thank you. Timothy, you are so kind. Now you must try these blueberries. They have been quickly chilled." Timothy couldn't think. His heart was sinking fast. He was unworthy to be in the presence of such greatness. Who was he, Timothy Dwight III, to be sitting next to Lana Lawne? His mouth grew dry. He said. "Water." "Water," she said. "No champagne?" Timothy's vision began to get blurred. He couldn't think. This wasn't happening. It was not real. It was an illusion. It had to be. Lana Lawne was 97 years old. There was a trick with the lighting. This was some type of Hollywood magic. What's wrong? Lana asked. You are faint, aren't you? Oh, please don't. I can't kiss you if you faint. Kiss me? Timothy said. You are thinking of my kiss, aren't you? She said. Of course you are. Don't worry, Timothy Dwight III. I have made a very firm commitment to kiss you before this evening is over. Upon these words, Timothy's eyes rolled upward and his limp body collapsed to the marble floor. Oh dear, Lana said. I remember this happening many years ago, but I did not believe it would still happen. He must have such a marvelous imagination to think of me in this way. Lana arose and went to the phone to call for help. It wasn't less than 5 minutes when the local medics arrived to administer first aid. They were surprised to see this beautiful woman greet them at the door, but they didn't give it much thought as they went about their business to revive Timothy Dwight III. As Timothy began to stir, they turned to Lana Lawne. Are you her new nurse? One of the men asked. Nurse? Whose nurse? Lana Lawne's nurse? I am Lana Lawne. Both medics laughed. You should be in show business, the men said. Lana looked at them in amazement. What on earth were they talking about? I am a little too old for show business, she said. The men laughed again. Stop it, they said. You are killing us. Lana Lawne didn't understand and decided to leave it. Is he going to be all right? She asked. There's nothing wrong with him, one of them said. He just needs some fresh air. Oh dear, she said, and I wanted this to be such a romantic dinner. Lana Lawne lets you have these elaborate meals on her premises? One of the men said. Must be nice. I am Lana Lawne. Both men laughed again. Lady, from the looks of you, there is absolutely nothing wrong, but I suggest you see a psychiatrist, one of the men said. Yeah, and I wouldn't tell Mrs. Lawne about your delusion. You might lose your job, another man said. I am Lana Lawne. Lady, you are not Lana Lawne, one of the men said. Timothy Dwight III began to stir and open his eyes. Lana bent down beside him. Timmy, please tell these men who I am. Tell them that I am Lana Lawne. You are... Timothy said, Timothy again rolled his eyes upward. No, Timothy, don't faint on me again, Lana said, and grabbed his arms and tried to keep him from falling over, but to no avail. The two men picked Timothy up. I think he needs some air now, one of the men said. Lana watched the men take Timothy out the door and into her gardens. All of this was truly something her friends would want to hear, but she stopped herself when she realized she had outlived all of them. She looked sadly at the dining room, where an untouched meal grew cold. There was perhaps some slight spark of romantic notions in her asking Timothy over to dinner. No, not perhaps. Most definitely was. But it was a notion nonetheless, as she realized 97 years old was not the time for make-believe. How could he possibly faint? She thought. Have I really grown that ugly? Lana walked over to the mirror with the 1920s ornates. Mirror, mirror on the wall, she said, looking into its glass. Suddenly she screamed and jumped, and the woman in the mirror jumped too. What? She said. No, this can't be. Lana put her hands up to her face and felt it. The wrinkles were gone. She looked at her hands and gasped. They were young and smooth. This is not possible, she said. I am imagining this. One of my medications must be bad. Noticing the men still outside, Lana ran out and confronted them. Do I look old? She asked. The mirror, it's lying. It's saying that I'm young, but I am not young. I am 97 years old, but my mind is going. I see a smooth hand. Do you see a smooth hand? Lana held up her hand, and the men looked at it. It's smooth, the men said. And my face, is it smooth or wrinkled? She asked. It's smooth, they said again. Am I ugly? She boldly asked. You really have a bad self-image, one of the men said. No, really, she said. Please, I think I'm losing my mind. You're gorgeous, the men said. Whoever told you that you were ugly? Lana thanked the men and began to walk back to her house. When she did, she noticed that she was really walking, not hobbling. She lifted her skirts and saw beautiful silky smooth legs with no varicose veins. Right before she reached the door, she suddenly reached up and touched her hair. She turned to the men again. Is it gray? She said, pointing to her hair. Gray? The men asked. You are as natural a blonde as they come. Oh, you are both so kind, she said. "I am going to come over there and give you both a big kiss." Upon hearing this, both men's eyes rolled upward, and their limp bodies collapsed to the ground.
Επιμέλεια Γιώργος Πιτροπογιαννάκης.